I'm Rennie McQuilkin, publisher of Antrim House Books, and very happy to welcome you again to an installment of Speaking of Poetry, with produced with the aid of Ken Picard and station manager Karen Handville. We are presenting you each month with some of the finest poets in New England, and we welcome you to visit our website to read more about them, antrimhousebooks.com. And today's third reading in this series will be presented by Michael Cervas, who will read to us some new poems and also poems from his brand new book, Captivated, and perhaps one or two from his earlier book, Inside the Box, all of these books being from Antrim House. Michael is a teacher of English at Westminster School, where he lives with his wife Deb, and also coaches squash, and conducts the school's poetry festival as well as its readings in the Gundrum series, which occur on Friday evenings once a month. He's a musician, he's a sports enthusiast, and among his many gifts, of course, is that of being one of our finest poets. Michael Cervas.
Thank you, Rennie. I want to thank both SCTV and Rennie for this opportunity. Rennie says he's the publisher of these books, and he is, but he's also my editor and friend. And as an editor especially, his footprint is all over both of the books that I've published through Antrim House. I want to get right to reading some poems, and I'm going to start with the opening poem in Captivated, which is the new book that just came out this summer. Actually, before I do that, I do want to say that I have been in this room before, and I have read poetry here before. I read in 2007, again thanks to a plug by Rennie, just before my first book was published, and I had a nice little talk about poetry, and I read a few of my poems, and they were on SCTV for years, like they go viral. And people will tell me they saw me at 4 a.m., and it's always a very happy thought. So thank you for having me here. The first poem is actually called Eating in Eden. If a boy wanted something to eat on a summer's morning in the woods behind our house on Thorn Drive, something sweet and cold, he had only two choices, really. He could shinny up the thick trunk of the ancient black cherry tree in the very middle of our forest, inch himself out precariously along the ever-narrowing branches, then reach up to grab the wine-dark cherries floating in the sky, pop them by handfuls into his mouth, and spray the pits out in a juicy rain. Or he could squirrel his way deep into the center of the wild blackberries that hug the ridge at the border of the woods and the old farmer's land, risking scratches and skinned elbows to tunnel far enough into the dark canopy of bushes to find the ripest ones. Thimbles that stained his fingers and face with wild splotches of mulberry paint and soaked into his shorts so deeply he could smell the berry's tartness, fermenting there even months later. Either place, up high and suspended above the forest carpet of loam, or lying down low on the soft ground in the silence of the aromatic earth, a boy felt alone, safe, and scared. That's just sort of how I feel right now, actually. Safe and scared. I'm going to read a number of other poems from this book. Many of my poems come out of personal experience. Some come out of reading. Some are just accidental poems. Some come out of newspapers. Poems come in lots of surprising ways, and I'll be talking a little bit about where the poems come from. This one comes from driving in Simsbury, and it's called Driving Home from the DMV, I Discover the Basic Operating Principle of the Universe. That should be the whole poem, I think, but it isn't. That's just the title, a long title. Driving home from the DMV on a rainy afternoon, actually, my daughter is driving, having just passed her test, I glance over at what used to be a gift shop with a cute little luncheonette to discover matching signs for two new places, Avon Driving School and teenage wasteland, revealing to all who have eyes to see that irony is the basic operating principle of the universe. And I'll stay in the book here, go to the middle. Here's a poem that comes out of personal experience. A couple of years ago, my wife and I were on vacation in Chicago. And in the morning, we were getting up and getting ready for the day and listening to the Today program. And there was a piece on the reopening of the Four Seasons Hotel in New York City, which had been completely remodeled. And I listened to it, kind of half listened to it, but was fascinated by it. And later that day, walking down the Chicago's Miracle Mile and looking at all the stores there, I noticed that one of the gaudiest stores actually was a store simply called Material Possessions. And those two things came together in this poem. That plus my interest in Zen Buddhism, but you'll see that at the end. The poem is called Desire. No freebies for the high rollers here. No upgrades ever, whispers the manager, holding her Manolo Blahniks daintily as she leads her visitors into the sparkling marble vestibule. If you want to spend a night in the penthouse suite, the entire 52nd floor of the new ultra-chic Four Seasons Hotel, you'll have to pony up the entire $30,000. The spread, of course, is magnificent. The decor beyond sumptuous. And it seems there's no shortage of dreamers or fools who want whatever notoriety or rush comes along with tossing away 30 grand for a room with 4 views. All for a single night in a palace, posh with sensuous amenities. A radiant temple to conspicuous consumption. Here, where all the material boys and girls shop, of course, at stores innocently named Material Possessions. And there, in the hallway, sitting in the dazzle of a cut glass chandelier on a teak table, a chiseled gold Buddha watches over everything, his eyes wide open, gone away, and then come back again to this very apotheosis of desire. The kind of poets I like, and Rennie can corroborate this, because we have a poet come to our school every year, a national figure of considerable renown. The kind of poets I like write poems that are accessible, but that have some mystery and then increasing depth the more you think about them. So the first reading, you say, I get that. You know, I understand what that poem is about. And a poem like Desire, I hope, works that way, and I hope it will take the careful reader into Buddhism a little bit at the end and into the idea of going away and coming back, which is a Buddhist term for enlightenment and self-discovery. All right, I'm looking down because my set list is down here and I have to find page numbers. I'll read another one from this book. This is actually a poem that I do read sometimes at readings, and so some of you may have heard it before. But it tells you a lot about the kind of person I am, I guess, and the kind of poetry I like. The poem is simply called What the Nuns Taught Me. I knew it would happen like this. The nuns of St. Aloysius taught me well. Every little pleasure is really a tiny sin. The greater the pleasure, the greater the sin. And you always pay for your sins, little and big, in this world and the next. So, just last week, when 22 of the 28 shots I took swished through the net in my Monday night basketball game, even though at 53 I was over a decade older than anyone else on the floor, and again, when I won every last game I played at Wednesday night squash, even against opponents who usually clobber me, I knew that soon I would have to pay. So, when I started feeling a tingling in my fingers, a tiny numbness creeping up my right arm by the weekend, I figured it was only just the beginning. And I remembered standing outside St. Aloysius School on the playground as snow, like flecks of tissue paper, swirled in the bitter air of early March. Liberated by some hardened 8th graders to scurry around telling the little kids the nuns had canceled school for the day. Feeling so free and so powerful until I ran smack into Sister Wilbert, the notorious scourge of the 6th grade. I can still feel the lash of her hand against my cheek, my eyes erupting in tears. It's a good thing, I suppose, that this Monday night, every shot I launched, no matter how smoothly the ball rolled off my fingers, bounced harmlessly away. And then I'll take a little chance on one here. I do tend to write a number of poems. Each book ends actually with a section. Rennie is partly responsible for this because he has a big say in the organization of the book. I give him bunches of poems and he helps make some sense out of those. But both books end with love poems, really. And I'm going to read a couple of those for the late night watchers of SCTV. The first one is called Making the Bed, which doesn't sound like it's going to be a love poem, or maybe it does. Making the bed. It was time to change the sheets again. She'd tossed the crumpled ones on the floor by the door, then vanished. So I began the stupid job alone, maneuvering the prodigious mattress all around the awkward frame, stretching the fitted bottom to reach the impossibly distant corners, smoothing the wrinkles up on top with a silky slide of my palm, fingers and eyes moving in concert until at last all that was left was to arrange the pillows and drape the comforter over the bed. The daylight now slipping through the feckless curtains, dream and desire almost gone. Everything so trim I'd all but given up. And then she called my name. And then we unmade that bed for hours. So that's my chancy one. This is much less chancy, and it kind of celebrates the love between my mother and father, who have been dead for over 2 decades, but who live in my poems, I think. People who read the books will know that. This is called Romance in the Days Before Email. Everyone knows romance lives in expectancies, blooms in the hours and days of waiting for the next chance meeting, for the slow, sensuous morphing of touch into kiss, of braided fingers into the dazzle of lips, before all breathing stops and the heart begins its new life. This kind of love takes time to grow, feeds on doubts and indecisions, lives in daydreams of imagined pleasures, a history of desire that simply cannot be written in instant messages. Romance needs the tectonics of time shifting all around it, needs distance and anxiety. 3 months into marriage, my father spent a lunch hour writing a letter to my mother. "My dearest wife," he began, still too shy even to name her. "Every day I pray to become more worthy of your love." He posted that letter in a box and waited 3 days for his feelings to climb 10 miles of crooked streets from Pittsburgh to Mount Troy. Every night looking into her eyes, imagining her reading his tender words, while during the days he sketched his plans at the drafting table. 3 whole days when his life hung in the balance of romance. And then one more poem from this new book, actually 2 more. Somebody once said that when you're introducing a book to the world, it's a good idea to read the first poem and the last poem. So I've read the first poem, and now I'll read the final poem in the book, which is, ends up being the title poem because it's also called Captivated, and the title of the book is Captivated. And this one you might think would be a love poem, but it's not. And it showcases my interest actually in local Simsbury history. My first book came out of having, through the generosity of Westminster School, a sabbatical year, a whole year off of teaching with full pay and benefits to do nothing but whatever I wanted to do, which turned out to be a lot of walking, a lot of reading, and some pretty productive writing. And I became very fascinated with Simsbury history, especially the history of the encounter of the European colonists, the settlers, and the Native Americans. And so this poem is sort of about that. It's called Captivated. That's what they called it, all of them, in sermons and stories, in broadsides and diaries, letters to kinfolk, sometimes even scrawled in haste on the bark of trees. A little girl, only 7 years, captivated by the Indians. Stolen away from the flames in the company of mothers and babies, and maybe a few scared older boys and girls. And so began the only cross-cultural experience available to the Americans. Everyone on the other side of the divide, it seems, wanting desperately now to know just how savage were the savages. How naked would those captives become? How dense were those forests? How seductive was the touch of red skin, the lure of barbaric whispers, the aura of their fires, the freedom of the wilderness? All right, I'm going to switch gears a little bit and read a few poems from my earlier book, published, I think it was in 2007 by Antrim House. I'm losing track of time a little bit. But let me begin with a poem that I actually like a whole lot, based on memory again, and my father appears in this poem. In what I said the first time, my very first public poetry reading, I said was my worst experience with my father, and some of my friends at school thought that it was going to be a horrifying revelation, and it's not really. I had a great relationship with my father, and he was a good man. The poem is called Nothing is Ever as Easy as It Looks. And I have to tell you, this is one of those poems that the title of the poem is also the first line, so I'm going to have to reread that. And I'm not going to get into an endless chain of rereading the title, but here it goes. Are you ready? Yes. Nothing is ever as easy as it looks, like shooting a free throw when the flow of the game has been suspended and you are standing still at the line, holding the ball in your hands like a stone. Or like staying in love after the tropical nights of passion have dissolved in the daylight's train of domesticities. Cooking, cleaning, caring for kids. Or like solving for X, that shadowy figure who always seems to slip away into the murky recesses of the equation just before you get your hands on him at last. Or like trying to cobble this poem together, stitching it from simple memories that have kept me so far from remembering that freezing January night long ago when I watched my father lying on his back on the old Indian blanket in our garage, the glare of the stark electric lantern blinding both of us, as he tried to place the tiny, almost invisible cotter pin there in the center of the drum, dropping it, spitting out, "Son of a bitch," and slamming his hand hard into the concrete floor. Then looking up helplessly at me because nothing is ever as easy as it looks. So that's not so bad, Dad, I don't think. Some of my poems, a lot of my poems actually, Rennie thinks maybe too many of them in the first book, come from science, actually. And this poem here comes from my reading in a science book that I was reading during my sabbatical year, written by Jared Diamond, who's one of my favorite writers, and he writes about evolution, and he writes about the large forces that have determined the kind of cultures we live in today. And he's just a remarkable writer, and if you get a chance to read any of his books, you should. His latest was called Collapse, and Guns, Germs, and Steel was before that. And my favorite, actually, is The Third Chimpanzee, which is all about interesting evolutionary problems and events. This particular poem is called Landscape Amnesia, which apparently is a social scientific term that is used often, and I use it to make a poem. Landscape amnesia. That's how social scientists explain our inability to notice fundamental changes in our environment. Little by little, our world alters. or we alter it, but so slowly over time, we can't see any differences between then and now. That Easter islander who chopped down the last tall palm swaying in the ocean's breezes just couldn't remember the crowded forest of his long-ago childhood, the taste of the fruit, the shade of the trees. He'd forgotten even the songs of birds that had lullabied him to sleep on so many star-filled nights. What he didn't recall, he couldn't care about. So felling that lonely tree meant nothing to him. He had landscape amnesia. Just like lovers, 5 or 10 or 20 years after they've met, choking on the gathering dust, without even the rush of a single memory to fill their ears and fingers, their tongues and eyes with the sudden, sweet flash of surprise. Probably the one poem that I get asked to read the most of the poems in the first book is a poem called The Annoying Age. And I think I get asked to read it because so many people can relate to its subject matter, which is the relationship between a parent and a child, a teenager. And you would think that the annoying age would be a sort of a critique of teenagers because they're really annoying to us parents. But it turns out that we're pretty annoying to them, and that's the turn of the poem, The Annoying Age. She's 13, almost 14 now. On the way to school this morning, she told me, with the absolute ennui of the enlightened, that I'd finally reached the annoying age. And so here I am, ostracized to an island in the Arctic Sea for the 3rd time in my life, where none of my jokes will be funny and nothing I say can ever be wise. At least for the next 8 years or so. I've been through this before. I'll be a part of her life, but only in my capacity to annoy her. Good thing I know how this story will end. Even fathers find their way home again. All right. I'm going to read a few unpublished poems, new poems, some not so new, just unpublished, in the time I have left. And the first one I want to read is a poem called Remembering. And again, it seems my parents get into almost all of my poems. They get into here, but by not getting into here. So here's the poem. It's called Remembering. When I consider how many people are alive today, breathing in this very moment, and the crush and pull of all their needs, I see at first only swirling storms in vast deserts. I hear only the screeching and squabbling of all the world's ferruginous tribes. But then I think there is opportunity here too, the chance for so many who have died to be remembered now by a living person. I'll start then. And not with my own parents, whose breathless voices I hear every day and night of my life, but instead with some little child, one of the nameless, speechless, swept forever from our memories. Oh, little darling, sweet sunshine, child of my dreams, my beautiful one. Although it's true I'll never know your name, if I close my eyes, I can see your smile, can almost touch the soft curve of your head resting there in your hands as you sleep. And I think I'm only going to have time for one more, so this is a very, very new poem. It's only about 2 weeks old, and it may not be finished. And here it is. It's What a Way to End. How about that for a title that'll fit? And it begins with a quotation from Murray Bale, from his novel Eucalyptus, that says, "What a way to end amongst things of exceptional ordinariness. Whether we fall from the skies in a shattering cascade of fiery debris, or draw our last breath in the dim silence of a serene hospital bedroom, we all really end the same way, alone and baffled. Like that astonished woman who hears only the stumbling buzz of a fly when she expected to witness her Lord and King. Or like those pale blossoms disappearing into the dark waters. After all, endings are just endings. There's nothing extraordinary about them. Yet, who among us wouldn't want to be surrounded at that moment by the exceptional ordinariness of things? The wind spreading the crinkled leaves of the plane trees just outside your window. The oriole's quick splash as she pushes off the feeder. Dirt and grass after a summer shower. The exceptional tenderness of that ordinary hand you've held in yours for years.
Thank you, Michael. If, as the nuns told you, every pleasure is a sin, then we have been sinfully enjoying ourselves for the last 25 minutes. What wonderful poems. Hardly ordinary. The ordinary things become extraordinary in those poems. If you would like to read more of Michael's poems and learn more about him or any other Antrim House books and poets, please do visit our website at antrimhousebooks.com and come back another month to hear the fourth poet read for you in November. Thank you very much.
Funding for Simsbury Community Television is provided in part by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.